You are listening to Three Kitchens Podcast, hosted by Aaron Walker and Heather Dyer.
We're friends trying out recipes in our own regular home kitchens. We hope our experiences will inspire you to get creative in the kitchen. All right, welcome to this episode of Three Kitchens Podcast. I'm your host, Heather Dyer, and with me is my co-host, Aaron Walker. Hi, Aaron.
Hello.
And we're really excited today to have a guest host with us at Third Kitchen. Her name is Kerrie Penney. She is the creator and host of the podcast Secret Heart Broadcasting. And I mean, when we talk about having creatives join us on the show, this guest is like the ultimate creative. She's a writer who has published poetry and short stories. She's produced and hosted radio and television programs, founded 2 communications companies, interviewed high-profile creatives, business leaders, artists, and visionaries. And in fact, Kerrie and I met many years ago because she was producing corporate videos and I was on the corporate side of things, and we worked together to produce all kinds of things. So welcome, Kerrie. We're so happy to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. That was lovely to hear, and it's lovely to see you both.
Mm-hmm. All right, so your podcast, Secret Heart Broadcasting.
Yes.
Tell us what it's all about. What do you mean by Secret Heart?
That is a really great question, Heather. So I can tell you a little bit about the genesis of it. I think my whole life, and the last time I had like a full-time job was 1984. I think I had a radio gig. And since then I've been freelancing. So I'm the original gig economy person. But things will drop into my head and I'll think, hey, that's a great idea, and just follow it. So I did that, through most of my career. And then about a year ago, I was sitting at my desk typing, writing, whatever, when you sit at your desk and wait for something to happen. And this idea came in that was like Secret Heart Broadcasting. And I wrote it down and I drew a little heart with lines around it and thought, oh, that's interesting. And when I looked back at it, I thought, oh, I think what I want to do is talk to people. And the first season happens to be women who have also followed their hearts. And like you guys did with this podcast, right? An idea drops in, you're like, well, let's try that. And it's a little bit scary and it's certainly purposeful and fulfilling and has an element of magic to it. And I think, and it's been the first year, and how I speak about the podcast is becoming more refined as the idea kind of becomes more refined. But I think what it is the courage to kind of lead from your heart, listen to your heart first, and then let the head inform. And, be almost like, in the tarot deck, there's a card called the Fool. It's the first card. And it's like the Fool walks into the world with a big open heart and a bouquet of flowers, and maybe is about to step off the edge of a cliff. But you love the Fool. And I think when we follow our hearts, we're just more, engaged with living. So there's a long answer to a pretty short question, but I think that's as close as I'm going to get.
I like that you say that it takes courage, because I think that's exactly what it takes to have an idea and then try and make it happen. The process of I've got an idea and then finding out how to actually put that into a final product or into something that's physically hasn't existed before is such an interesting process, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I guess you can kind of align that with cooking in a way, right? Like we can talk about big, following your heart and that kind of nervous energy and bringing it in. And am I going to be a fool? We have our egos too that are keeping us in check to keep us safe. But just when you said that, Aaron, I was thinking it's like cooking. Like we learn how to cook from, following a recipe in a book or your mom's book or something. And then, through circumstance, I don't think for me, it wasn't bravery. It was like, well, I don't have this in the house, so I'm going to try this and I'm going to freeform this. And yeah, there's a certain amount of that kind of heart-led, not knowing quite what you're doing and hoping that the results won't be disastrous.
That's exactly what we're always doing here. We just recorded yesterday the first part of an episode that will be closer to Easter, so it'll be after this one, where I said to Aaron, okay, I have this vision of the thing, and it's baking, which is not my forte. But I was like, there's a thing I want to bake, and I have this vision. I know what I want it to be. And Aaron's like, yes, I got you. Like, I get it.
Yeah.
I see it. We're on the same, we share a brain, we often say.
We've got the wavelength.
Yeah. Well, that's important.
think the same and have the same, we can kind of see it. And then we talk through how could I make this work, and then cross your fingers and hope that it turns out right.
That's the
That's the
TBD
last
part.
bit of it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think you did that. Didn't you do a birthday cake for your
Oh
oldest son
gosh.
a while ago that was like robot cake? I thought that was
Oh,
great.
and
Anyway.
that was one of those that was like, oh, I'm really putting myself out there.
Mhm.
But it was part of the experience of trying to do it.
And well, and I bet that's a story you're never going to forget. Certainly your sons will never forget. I think in that bravery of putting yourself out there, something magical, that's my word, and maybe alchemical, whatever, something chemical can happen. But putting yourself out there is the key because, life is short.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. I was just looking, there's a picture behind Kerrie, and I think
For those of you listening, but feel free to watch the video too. It's based on a Dutch kind of like, I think, a 15th century memento mori kind of idea where you incorporate, at that time you were incorporating skulls or bones along with life to remind you that life is temporary. And this is by a Calgary artist, John Hall, and he's kind of collaged the Dutch skull with a little bit of a smoking ember to remind us about death. But then in front is just this luscious pastry and lemons and gorgeous food. So reminding like life is short and sweet. So eat and enjoy it.
Yeah, very cool.
I'm
Mhm.
loving that so much.
So at Christmas time, I ran into a mutual friend that Kerrie and I have from many years ago, and the topic of your podcast came up.
Oh,
And he said to me, I don't know if it's my thing. I tried to listen, but I think it's for women. And I wondered your take on that. Do you feel, I mean, you did say the first season ended up being all your guests were women, but was that your plan, or what's your plan going forward in that way?
well, I think I would never exclude men or anyone, but it happened to be for me the first season. And it grew out of the idea that I walk with these amazing women. My closest friends, most of my closest friends are women, and we have these amazing conversations. And
Mm.
I thought, wouldn't it be great if, we could share what you know? Because they've saved me so much. They know so much. They just save me so much time. You ask an expert about how to do this, and they know how to do that. So, in terms of is it for women, I would say women are naturally attracted to it because the first season is women. But I think it's about humans sharing what they know in a spirit of generosity and from the heart. And I don't want to kind of wade into this kind of world of duality here, but I think sometimes it is easier for women to come from the heart than men.
Mm.
Traditionally through, hundreds of thousands of years, we have been socialized differently.
Mhm.
And I think it's easier for women to access that than men. And I'm not saying that's universally true, and I don't want to get into a discussion of binary, but I think there is some truth to what he said. And also, sometimes if you take a listen, you'll be surprised, oh yeah, I got something from that, or it's not for you. And if it's not for you, that's totally okay. I think that's what it's about, is finding more things that vibe with us and enriching our own energy in the world and moving through it and trying to be light as opposed to fear. Because
Mm.
I think that's certainly the bottom line for the podcast for me. How can I use my superpower for good?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes through because you talk about some intense things in some of your episodes, but it's all very positive. You've got sort of like, this was hard, yes, and this is what I learned from it, which is like a really
Mm.
important thing to do with what you struggle with in life, or what causes you grief. Like, if you're just going through it and suffering through it without learning the lessons or coming out with something better on the other side, like that's
Mm.
okay. There's hard things and I can get through it, and things get better, right?
Yeah, and what we learn from the hard things might be surprise lessons. And then you can help other people with hard things.
Yeah.
Like, goodness, we've all been there, like, losing someone we love or having a big disappointment or whatever it is. Yeah. Wouldn't it be great to have a great, wise friend you can just dial up and say, "Ma, what am I supposed to do?"
Well, it's so much easier to get the advice from someone who's been there before too,
Hmm.
and take that into your toolkit when it hits on your doorstep, because
Yeah.
trying to create the wheel by yourself, I guess.
Yeah, again. And I think there's
Mhm.
something, as you were just saying that, Erin, like the experts, like the people I talk to, okay, experts are important,
Mm.
but real life experts, I think to me are more important, right? Like everyday leaders. It comes back to that heart piece, leading from the heart, everyday people who have been through something that might be able to teach you something. I think of my friend Sarah, who is the last guest on the podcast, Sarah Woods, who I think Heather also knows from our past lives in communication. But she would say, like, heart leadership is really important now. And I think there's some resonance to that for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think like when you talk about finding what resonates and kind of like lifts you up, we're always looking for those people we connect with. I was talking about Aaron and I being on the same wavelength about things, and I think it's because we just typically live in the same space. We have the same kind of energy, and we feed off each other because we, raise each other up, I think. And that's the kind of thing we're all looking for, right? We're all looking to connect with each other.
But I mean, who knew we'd be living in these kind of times either, right? Where that becomes even more important. Basic things like connection, finding someone, lifting up, making good food. Like, how do we bring high vibration and kind of a good feeling and a lighter energy into the world, which albeit is, light and dark exists, right? Again, back to my school or painting behind me. But for my life, and I'm, kind of more or less midlife, probably less midlife now, but I want there to be, maybe it's just being a small everyday light that can somehow lift people up. And conversely, when I'm struggling, I'm able to reach out and say, wow, that I'm having a really tough time, and know how to take care of myself, number one, and have a network of people who can also lift me up. Yeah.
And it's nice to hear those deep conversations and to have those true conversations, as opposed to so many of the subsurface, like superficial things, because we can have a million of those in our lives, and especially more so now with the way that so much is communicated without in-person real contact. And so sometimes having that come back into your life again through your podcast, like hearing these great stories, and it's like you've had that conversation with that person too, and you feel like they're part of your support network, part of your community, part of your people.
Wow, thank you for that. Because back to the courage and coming into it. I mean, everyone I spoke to, and both Heather and I have a background in corporate communication. It's like, no, it can't be too long. People don't want to hear serious things. Make it shorter. Make it, what's the soundbite? And, as I was in the beginning struggling to fit that, I just thought, no, I don't want a 5-second clip. I mean, certainly, there are great things that can happen in 5 seconds, but I want something deeper and more resonant. And maybe other people do too.
I think they do.
Even if you've got two people here, listen, and it resonates with us, you've done what you've set out to do.
Yeah, right? That's that simple purpose. And that's enough.
Hey listeners, thanks for tuning in to this episode. We hope you're enjoying our talk with Kerrie Penney. Her podcast, Secret Heart Broadcasting, has wonderful conversations with real people sharing their lived experiences and passing on what they've learned with kindness and generosity. We're fans of Secret Heart Broadcasting, and we know you will be too. And now let's get back into it. She's got a great recipe to share with us.
Let's get to a little bit of food chat. One thing we ask of our guest hosts who join us is to send us a recipe, something that is special to you or that you just love and want to share. And so can you tell us what recipe you sent and why you chose it?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, in a lot of my writing and a lot of my being on earth, I come from, my maternal line is Prairie Ukrainian, women. And my mom was the kind of person that taught me how to cook, maybe like a lot of our, ancestors did, where it's not really written down, and add a pinch of that, a bit of that, taste till you like it, cook until done, those kind of things.
Things that stress us out.
Right? Like every prairie cookbook has one of those, like,
Oh,
cook
yes.
until done. Yes. So, and that's the tradition I came from, on my mom's side. So I sent you guys an essay I wrote about making tomato macaroni soup, which was the soup my mom made to comfort us. She was a woman who showed her love through food. And she was more or less a single mom. And, there was certainly challenges in our growing up life, but she could calm things down with comforting food. And this soup was just, my search image for kind of comfort when I was a kid. So what I did was I wrote out an essay that sort of has the recipe in it based on a conversation I had with my mom when she was older and had hearing aids and, was not particularly interested in details, right? So, yeah, so I sent an essay about how to make a pretty basic soup. I mean, for you too, I know it's probably very basic, but for me, there was this key piece that I kept on getting wrong, and I had the need to know how to make it, which, happened rather serendipitously because, not long after that, she wasn't able to tell me how to make that soup. So I'm so glad that I had the foresight to ask her to stick with it, even though we were, she's like, I don't know how. And I'm like, please tell me how. And yeah, and I wrote an essay. It's a recipe that more or less works. And now my daughter knows how to make that soup, although she's not really interested in that yet, but she will be. And now there's more or less a recipe.
Mm-hmm.
So it's tomato macaroni soup.
Heather kind of made one part of it. We both kind of finished it up at the end, and I'd like to hear the process and the walkthrough because, yeah.
All right. Well, I hope it worked out and was comforting.
Very much so, yes.
Yay. Okay. So the base for this is tomatoes. And the one thing I grow here in our like barely zone 3 Canadian neighborhood. And by the way, Heather lives a few houses down from me in the same neighborhood. So at the end of, and we typically get an early frost here. So some tomatoes come off the vine beautiful and ripe and wanting to be eaten, and others are kind of hard and mean and green and sit over there and, ripen at their own whatever. So there's usually when fall is upon us and I know it's getting cold and there's the last of those tomatoes, I'll just swipe them all, roughly chop, put them in a pot, add, I think, basil, oregano, salt and pepper, fry it up together, celery, like a kind of, and carrot thing. Yeah, fry it all up so you have the base of the tomato base, which is not rocket science, but it sure is tasty when you can use fresh tomatoes. So farmer's market or your own. And then meanwhile, fill a pan with water and put in macaroni or, if you're allergic to gluten, there's lots of great options out there for that. Or, I mean, I've had this also with rice, but for me, I'm an elbow macaroni person. That's my, get that boiling until al dente and take it out. And then in the meantime, the secret pot is the roux, which, so that would be the butter and the flour and the black pepper. Frying that and then gradually adding the milk and stirring. I use a metal whisk to make sure there's no lumps and just trying to get that happen. And then when it's all milky, you add the macaroni to that. I wish I had the recipe in front of me. And then it's the red into white, I think is the mystery key, because the other way it gets kind of like curdly.
We have the recipe here. Okay, so the way we went about it is as Erin said, I made the tomato base.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like about this is that you could do this any day when you got some time, you got some tomatoes, make your base. I think this is very adaptable to what you've got on hand, what you want to throw in there, onions, garlic, celery. I do think the celery is key. I kind of like that.
Okay. I didn't know what was in this tomato base until now. So
well, you didn't look at the recipe.
Because that's part of the surprise.
That's okay.
I did part 2. I figured out what's going on in these flavors.
So then it also suggests a little bit of wine if you happen to have a bottle open, which I love. It's like, if you have some, throw it in. If you don't, that's fine.
Yeah.
I used some cooking sherry that I had. Which worked great. And then bay leaves. And you're going to let this simmer and do its thing and taste, season, simmer for about an hour, you have written down. So your house smells delicious. It's like the kids said, something smells good. Like, what are you making? It's just, it smells good. And lovely. Now there was a question I had for you here. You say in your essay, I run the contents through mom's old food mill with the red wooden handle. Now, what is a food mill? I don't actually know what that is.
Okay, I have, do you want to pause and I can go grab it?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
Okay, hang on.
I'm so excited to see this.
I know. I was like, I'm not sure what that is exactly. Oh, look.
This is a food mill. So I don't know, for people listening, it's like a sieve with a handle and a blade. And it probably is from the 60s, given the it's got, red wooden knob, red wooden blade, and you turn it. This is the sound of it turning. It chops up on the bottom and then scrapes the sieve part on the bottom. And it makes a beautiful, some people like a chunky soup. I like what this does. So you run it through and then you've got some, and here's the top of it, some delicious compost.
Right.
And through the
so
bottom, it just blends it together. So it's like
Yeah.
a really active sieve with a blade. And it has little hooks that sit over the bowl. And this is when I cleaned out my mom's kitchen, and at some point we will all have to do that, it was maybe the most valuable thing for me.
Did you have to fight for it?
No, I didn't.
Sibling?
I didn't at all. It also helped that I was the one cleaning out the kitchens.
Oh.
But I knew that the soup was like, kind of a vision quest for me. So it was just another key piece to have. So yes, the food mill. And I think there are more modern versions, or you could take like a pointy strainer and, use yeah, there are many ways to do it.
But that thing looks incredibly efficient, and that thing will never die. It's so awesome because it's like not electric. You don't have to plug it. You know what I mean? Like there's no.
It's made well. You could never put it in the dishwasher, and never ever.
Whatever.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Yeah, I kind of treat that when I pull it out. Even there's a real ritual to this soup for me, and even the bay leaves, right, which are also. I think I talk about laurel leaves, right? So in the days of Greek gods, it would be bay leaves on their little crowns, but they're also, incredibly tasty. And I try and grow bay every year here. Of course, it never winters, but.
Well, I ended up using my immersion blender and just did kind of a rough blend. It was not smooth. It was, as you say, kind of chunky, which suited me. I thought that would be good. And then, so then you say you could put this in jars and put it in your freezer. And then when you're ready to make your soup, you've got it. I will just make a small note that it also makes great pizza sauce. It also makes great to put on gnocchi. My kids had for lunch the next day. I just warmed some up and they loved that. So it's kind of like a tomato sauce, really, like a very versatile. Oh, and there's one other ingredient, the Maggi sauce.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Which is, honestly, probably like not that good for you, but that was always, the secret ingredient, right? Just a splash, not too much. So yeah, it's a secret sauce. Yeah. And I actually have a jar of that in my freezer right now. My daughter came home. She's in university now. When she comes home, we try and, I like to have a jar ready to go because it's a good resetting of her nervous system when we sit down and have a bowl of that.
Love that. So then each individually, we finished it up with the roux and the pasta and made the soup. And I've made this twice now, actually. I made it with because me and my lactose issues, I made it with a lactose-free milk and I made it with almond milk. I didn't love it with almond milk. I don't know, that it was a different texture or something to it. I would recommend a dairy product if you can, for my preference. But anyway, and Erin, I assume you went full.
I went full on milk and cream and I'm a dairy liker. So I did struggle with, it did curdle a bit when I made it. Now, because my brain is so good at holding on to information, I have no idea which direction I put white into red or red into white. I can't remember how I did it. But that didn't really affect us negatively. It was like, okay, whatever. It was so delicious. It was so creamy. My husband came in the house. He got off of work early that day. And I was like, oh, you picked the day to come home early. Because he was like, what smells so good? And I was like, homemade cream of tomato soup. And he was like, oh, yeah, we gobbled it all up. It was,
oh, I love that.
It was so good. And, it is the season for sickness. Everyone's been sick. It was one of those days he wasn't feeling good, came home, hot, warm soup. He was like, oh man, this hits the spot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really restorative. I'm so happy to hear that. My heart is singing. Yeah, because I think, and even in the making of it, right? Like it takes, especially the tomato part, it just takes time and it's, I think like a lot of cooking, but particularly the soup for me, it has a meditative kind of thing. It's humming me back into, down my maternal line. I can, when you grow things and cook them, it's fantastic. And it just, on good days, there's love going into that pot. Yeah.
I like how in your essay you said you stir, I can't remember which direction, let's say you stir clockwise and think of all the things you're grateful for, which I think is a really lovely reminder to us all to take a moment that some days you just got to get something cooked and get it on the table because you just need to eat and get going. But if you have time and you can make it a bit more of a enjoyable, relaxing sort of activity for yourself, boot everybody else out of the kitchen and stir your tomato sauce and really, feel that love you're putting into it. I think that's wonderful.
I'm really loving the connection that this made between you and your mom and how you've, spoken about the process of getting this, but then how this is becoming something special for you and your daughter too. Like I've always got that can in the fridge ready to go because you know that it's going to provide that comfort, right? And that ritual and that tradition of, now her having that. I think that's a beautiful, generational, yeah. I love that a lot.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I do too. And now it can comfort your family.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. We can teach our boys the same. We have all boys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. I don't think I've ever had a tomato soup in my house that hasn't been from a can. I stopped buying it or consuming it because I just didn't like it. And it was like, oh, I've lost this in my life. I don't have a yummy tomato soup. I can't wait to have fresh tomatoes. I can't wait. I'm hoping to put some, I've got that spot against my house too where I can grow tomatoes because it meets the heat and the light being right up against a building. And so I'm very motivated to grow some tomatoes this year.
I think through all that is just the reminder of the connection of food through my maternal line. And I know not everybody has the privilege of having that, but it's been so important and nourishing for me. And it's spiritually and physically nourishing. And it's not about like riches or getting stuff. My mother was a very simple, good-hearted person. That just reminds me that that is what's really of value in life, right? Leading with a good heart, making loving connections, being kind to ourselves and the people we love.
That's lovely. And this recipe has reminded me of, we did an episode way back where Erin sat her grandma, her Oma, down and asked her for the recipe for a strudel. She wanted to make this strudel that Oma made so well. And she was like, just do it till it feels right and eyeball this and pinch of that and whatever. And it was a lot of fun to hear all about this experience of getting her grandma to tell her how to make this. And I think sometimes those, when you're like, oh, I really wish I knew how she made that and I really want to talk to her and get it, and maybe even sit down and bake it with you so that you see the process. Maybe that's the best way to do it.
Yeah. Well, that's a lovely kind of challenge for your listeners, or a loving challenge is find someone you love and get them to show you the food they love.
Or take it on yourself to the things that you like to make for your family or your friends, and maybe write them down and gift that recipe card.
Well, who knows what the wisdom people are carrying, right? And maybe they're too shy. Maybe they want to share. I mean, I guess, this kind of takes me back to the opening conversation we had about, is this a woman's thing? I don't know. I think this is a human thing, right? We want to know the food we came from, or some of us do. We're curious about when we have friends who are good cooks. We want to learn. And, we learn by asking people, and it doesn't matter if it's your grandmother or your grandfather or your uncle or your friend, or even, I don't know, a kid. Some kids are really great cooks.
And it's such an easy way to start a deeper conversation or a richer conversation, right? Like to ask about something with food and then pry a little bit.
Yeah.
Can find that common thing to talk about and then go deeper.
And then maybe they'll give you your secret sauce. In my mom's case, it was the Maggie, but
yeah. Like your new favorite ingredient you didn't even know about, and now you can't live without, or whatever.
Yeah. That would be salted lemons for us, right, Heather?
Oh, yeah.
I think that's the secret ingredient in my house still.
Yes. Yeah. I think I'm feeling inspired to go and look through the old community cookbooks maybe, or, inherited a pile of those from my mom.
Oh, wow.
And every so often I peek through, you know, from the small town choir. I'm like, what? I don't know. She must have just wanted to support them because she wasn't in the choir. But there's a couple of books where she had submitted recipes. So maybe I'll go back and look through the old church cookbooks and see what's in there. And
Gold mine.
yeah, well, we'll see. You never know. Not always good. Like,
Yeah.
there's some questionable stuff.
Well, I did love your Jello salad episode. That was fun.
Are you a fan of Jello salads?
I am actually, and I have my mother's the jelly molds. I have. That was another thing. Please don't tell my siblings. They'll be like, "Where are our jelly molds?" But yeah.
Oh, well, you're in good company here because we love our jellied salads.
Yes.
We've heard from so many people who are like, ooh, really?
So many people seem to get really upset about them, but man, oh man, they're always
a delicious surprise.
Yes. And beautiful. Beautiful too. With Easter coming up, it's like the perfect time to put that on your table. Just
there you go.
That out there.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all these fabulous stories on your podcast and then coming and sharing this really wonderful recipe with us and our listeners.
Oh, thank you for asking.
Can you tell our listeners where they can go and find you?
Yeah, sure. Secret Heart Broadcasting is on Instagram at Secret Heart Broadcasting, or on YouTube, Secret Heart Broadcasting, or you can get anywhere from the website, which is secretheartbroadcasting.com.
Easy peasy.
Easy peasy.
Nice. Let's go and have a lovely day. The sun is out. So
yeah, we think about planting our gardens.
Yes.
Yeah. And now for the fine print. For links to recipes and many other random things we talked about in this episode, check out the show notes or our website, www.threekitchenspodcast.com. Join us over on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, YouTube, and TikTok to see what we're cooking up next. And if you love the show, tell a friend. Word of mouth is the #1 way people learn about new podcasts. Thank you so much for listening.
I come from garlic, so yeah.